How is the Spanish sparkling wine Cava different from the Italian bubbly Prosecco? What makes Xarel stand out from Spain's other traditional Cava grapes? And how did Alicante's Monastrell grape give rise to the rare Fondillón wine, and what makes it different from port or sherry? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Sarah Jane Evans, Master of Wine and author of the terrific new book, The Wines of Central and Southern Spain, From Catalunya to Cadiz. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover how the aging process for premium cavas affects their taste profile and how that compares to champagne. The historical significance of the Terra Alta region, historical artifacts Sarah Jane has encountered while visiting Spanish vineyards, how Richard Ford's 1840s observation about Valencia still defines Spanish wine culture today, what might surprise you about the ancient amphorae in Valencia and their use in modern winemaking, how the 3 main styles of sherry differ, which types of glassware and food pair best with sherry, what copitas are and how they differ from other glasses used for sherry, how serving temperature affects your enjoyment of sherry, what you need to know about wine in the Canary Islands, and the challenges and opportunities Sarah Jane sees for the future of the Spanish wine industry. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 359. Thank you for your encouraging emails and DMs about the new weekly update on what's new in the world of wine, including trends, studies, and quirky human interest stories, both in Canada and around the world. I'm glad you find these tidbits interesting. So what's new trend-wise this week? Well, in Ontario, wine lovers are leaning into intimate experiences. A few boutique VQA producers report a surge in bookings for small group vineyard after dark tastings. Dark sky dinners among the vines, ooh, that sounds romantic, are selling out faster than pizza nights. Definitely more romantic. BC's wine tourism circuit is seeing a different shift. Instead of big tasting rooms at the wineries, consumers are opting for small pop-ups in urban markets in Kelowna and Vancouver to taste local wines without the drive into the Okanagan Valley. Marketing moves. As of October 1st, Air Canada became the only North American legacy carrier offering complimentary beer and wine, including Heineken 0.0, the continent's first in-flight non-alcoholic beer, to all economy passengers on every flight, even short domestic hops. The airline's VP of Loyalty and Product told Reuters this week that free sips have a, quote, disproportionate impact on customer satisfaction, end quote, and cost far less than waiving baggage fees. Ay. Domaine Carneros, the respected Napa Valley sparkling producer, just unveiled its 2025 holiday gift collection, which is a masterclass in experiential gifting. And we're not just talking a bottle with a bow on it here. They've launched high-end pairings, like their Pinot Noir with Himalayan salted caramels, yes please, and even a Pampered in Pink kit that combines their Brut Rosé sparkling with magnolia-scented spa essentials. And now you know what to get me for Christmas. So how's the harvest going? Ontario is in full swing after early September picks for sparkling wine grapes, which is usually picked first in any region to maintain that fresh, crisp acidity. Conditions through late September stayed dry by day, cool by night, great for ripeness and freshness. BC's recovery year reports a strong 2025 harvest, especially following the devastating 2024 frost. The province extended vintage replacement support to help wineries bridge this shortfall, so meaning they can source grapes from other regions. That is clearly specified on labels, by the way. Quebec producers officially declared vendages, harvests underway, and Nova Scotia reports low disease pressure and a clean crop. Beyond Canada, California says the 2025 vintage is steady-paced with high-quality fruit. Late September coastal reports indicating long hang times for grapes to ripen. France's Champagne region is managing yields to match a softer demand, and Italy remains upbeat with forecasts for strong quality in their Prosecco sparkling grapes. In Portugal's Alentejo region, it's now officially a midnight to 8 a.m. harvest zone. Workers pick grapes under headlamps, harvesting by moonlight to protect acid levels and flavor. And my suspicion is that that is due to increasingly warm temperatures globally. So you need that acidity in the grapes. If you pick them during the day, they're going to have even more sweetness. The twist? Many of the workers prefer it, apparently. They say nighttime picking gives them the daylight to enjoy their lives, not sure when they sleep though, and cooler temperatures and a bit more of a nocturnal magic in the rows. I wonder what's going on there. It's a reminder, winemakers are embracing the moon as much as the soil. If you have some wine news or a quirky human interest story you think I should share on the podcast, email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'm also sharing news and wine reviews on Instagram, where I'm at Natalie McLean Wine. So follow me there and I'll follow you back. Back to today's episode, we're focusing on the central and southern regions of Spain today, but as I mentioned last week, we won't be chatting about Rioja in north central Spain as we dedicated episodes 303 and 304 to that region with Andrew Lechmere. Two of you are going to win a copy of Sarah Jane Evans' wonderful book, The Wines of Central and Southern Spain from Catalunya to Cadiz. If you'd like to win a copy, please email me and let me know you'd like to win. It doesn't matter where you live. I also have 2 copies of Dr. Tufi Niedermeyer's book, The Wines of Brazil, to give away. So I'll choose 4 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Keep them for yourself or give them as gifts. Okay, on with the show. There are more than 600 grape varieties, if I understand, and no, we're not going to go into each one of them, but that's mind-boggling for this country. But you describe, you know what, I've always read this grape. I have not heard people often enough say it, but Xarel, how do you say that?
Well, it was a bit like, as I mentioned earlier, a company called Deutsch. If you have X, this is a particularly good variety to if you're going to do a Trivial Pursuit game or something. The X is a sh, so it's a SH or CH, sh. And then it has, where the double L is, because it comes from Catalonia on the east coast, there's like a full stop or a punctuation mark in between. So you just throw yourself into it and call it Xarel.
Xarel. Okay, I like that.
Xarel is something I learnt about because it used to be, if you were making the traditional method champagne style sparkling wine, which came typically from Catalonia, from that Mediterranean coast, it was one of the 3 grape varieties. And I learnt it like a textbook. I needed to know it for the Wine and Spiritual Education Trust exams. It didn't mean anything to me. But what's happened and it's all part of this very dynamic change in Spain, is that people have begun to identify that there is this grape variety, white grape variety, which was only a component in blending, but actually grown by itself, it makes lovely, fresh, excitingly lively wines, not very high in alcohol. It's also clearly, of the 3 grape varieties, it's the one that means that if you're making Cava, the sparkling wine, it's the one that will last. It has a capacity to age, which is better than the other 2.
And the other 2 being?
Oh, right, here we go. No, it's Macabeo, which is elsewhere in Spain is Viura, which is the white grape variety of Rioja. And what's fascinating about Viura is that's a variety I did not love. I can say this widely in public. I really didn't. And yet people are learning now to grow it in the right places, to do the right viticulture, and it's becoming lovable, if I can say that. And then the other one is a variety called Parellada. Some people use to make a pure sparkling wine from in the Cava area, which can be very successful, but there are others who are, I think it's less popular. So the three of those are the ones that are interchangeably and still are used. If you get a regular glass of Cava in a wine bar, then you're probably going to have those three varieties inside.
Okay. And since we're talking about Cava, the sparkling wine, how would you compare it to Prosecco? I know the grapes are different, the methods are different.
Yeah, exactly. So then you have to sell it. So I think you and I privately talking to each other, can say, well, the thing about Prosecco is that it's made by a method where effectively the bubbles are created and are captured, and it makes a pleasantly fizzy drink. Whereas the thing about Cava is it's made exactly like champagne. It's aged exactly like champagne because it's aged in the bottle with its yeast. It begins to develop other aromas which are nothing to do with flowers or fruit.
More bready, more earthy.
Exactly. So then the interesting thing is the youngest Cava can be released very young, at 9 months, younger than your youngest champagne. And that's where the poor reputation of Cava has come, I think, because you get this very young wine, which is fizzy. At that time, if you're going to have a very young fizzy wine, then Prosecco is very appealing. It's fruitier, it's a bit sweeter.
From the Glera grape in Italy, yeah.
Now, if you walk into somewhere, a Cava producer in Penedès, in the Mediterranean part of Spain, and you say Prosecco, the whole room will kind of turn around in consternation. But it's true. And all one can say is because I think Cavas, as a result, had a really hard time. We can see that Kylie Minogue and others, celebrity people, have put their names behind Prosecco. And Cava hasn't had the same. Yeah, exactly. So, but you can say it's possible that what you do is you get into sparkling wine when you're first starting drinking and you really enjoy Prosecco. And then as times pass, you learn more, then it's possible that you get into Cava. And then what's happening now is there's a big movement, small but big at the same time, which is at the top end with wines that have been aged for 10 years, 12 years, like a champagne, as those are being released and celebrated in Spain. And they are really something exceptional.
Are they aged on their lees, those spent yeast cells, to develop that extra creamy breadiness? Yeah, okay.
It's exactly the kind of thing like you'd find with a very mature champagne, and they age brilliantly. But the Cava is having to work hard to get us to listen to that message, so that I'm involved in doing tastings in Spain and also in London as well. And I say we, I mean, I'm independent, but I think there is a story to tell there. And I remember, actually, I was thinking, I was in last year, I go every year to Texom, which is a sommelier conference just in Irving, just outside Dallas. I'm meeting a man who ran a Cava bar there. And I had to say to him, you're very brave.
Yes.
I shouldn't have said that. But in fact, there is so much happening now in Cava that I think the message is it's worth taking a second look, but do make sure that you try the ones that are 18 months, which is Reserve Superior and mature, because that's going to be a bit more like champagne.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I often find they're competing on price, Prosecco and Cava, but two very different styles. And of course, Cava means cave.
I have to say, a terrible word. So,
cave wine.
Fine. Yeah. What we want to know now, I think all of us nowadays want to know, where does a wine come from? So maybe you can visit the place or you can watch travel programs. And if you just say, well, it's this thing which can come from 4 different parts of Spain, what do I know? It's not great.
No. Well, you've got your work cut out for you, so you will continue to be employed for years, Sarah Jane. I am a fan of Cava wines and Spain in general, but we're just talking to the converted here. But you open your book noting that you're walking in the vineyards. When you walk in the vineyards, often reveals history from Roman amphoras, those big clay vessels used to age wine, to Civil War relics, which is really cool. What's the most haunting or unusual artifact you've ever seen?
That's interesting, actually. Now, look at this wine. I think about it because it comes from an area called Terra Alta, high land. And in fact, it is the most tragic place. So lovely winemakers, happy memories, all of that. But in fact, I was given a prize by the people there on one occasion, and it was in a big celebratory event in a bombed out part, they have preserved the old part of the village, which was entirely bombed out in the Civil War. But I think day before yesterday, I was in Rioja, in the centre of northern Spain, where the great red wines come from, and I was crossing the Ebro River, because the big river that runs through Rioja goes through Rioja and then comes out, finally, it's the only one of the great big rivers that comes out of the Mediterranean. All the others go to the Atlantic. So it's this wonderful river, gets wider and wider and wider. It eventually decants into the Mediterranean by this denomination, Terra Alta. And there were horrendous wars, fights to the death in the Civil War in the late 1930s. Bitter atrocities on both sides. And if you go now with these people or any of the other viticulturists in the denomination near the river, it was really at the end of the war, when they dig up the soil to plant a vine, you will find bones, obviously, and then tin cans, you may find medals. And so you see these things, you just have to scuff up the earth, and there is the remainder of horrendous wars. And it's strange because I can think that maybe for the First World War in northern France, it's all been quite manicured. So you can, you may have lost a relative and you can go and see the gravestone. It's all very nicely looked after. But these vineyards are still just on top of terrifying relics. But there was one lovely experience that comes out of that. There's a very delightful sparkling wine producer in that area who took me down into his cellar, not far down, didn't go down too many flights of stairs, and then we started walking along a corridor, and he had all his amphoras all the way along the corridor, and then we walked upstairs, and we walked up these stairs, and finally what happened was we ended up in the middle of a field. So what this had been was a hideout during the Civil War. The field was used as an airfield, and it just had a little casing over the doorway. So you suddenly find these things as you're driving around, just these little doors with a little canopy over them, and they all lead down to tunnels where you could hide away while the bombing was going on. It's not yet 100 years, and it still feels, in certain places, very recent.
Yes, unearthing history. Now, you note that Alicante, is that both a region and a grape? Or a city and a grape?
Well, that's very interesting. How can I put it? The grape is not used as that name in that area. So it's really the region, the denomination. We were talking about Monastrell earlier, and Alicante is one of the places for Monastrell. But what's so fascinating about it is that it doesn't just make red wines, that historically they used to make a wine out of this red grape that got so ripe they didn't need to fortify it, because it created, as the grape on the vine got so sweet that it turned itself into alcohol. And then it was a wine that was stable enough. You could have it in a barrel, and then you could send it to India or to Africa or around the world. It didn't destroy itself. I mean, that was the important thing about all these wines like port and Madeira and sherry, that they could be sent around the world with no problem of having any damage to them or oxidation. And so that wine was called Fondillón, Fondillon, Fondillón. There are very, very few of them left. Very few, because you have a Solera, and it's like all fortified wines nowadays. So they may have a nice image, but they don't sell it in vast quantities. So you can go into a bar. If you're on holiday in Alicante, you definitely will, and they will offer you at the end of a meal this kind of red sweet thing, which is not nearly as good as port. It's really not pleasant. It's the kind of thing you get for 5 cents. Or you can go to one of the very rare wineries and try this thing. But it's an interesting wine because it's not sweet like port is, which has this alcohol and warmth and ripeness. And it's not dry like a regular red wine. It's in between. It has a bit of alcohol, but not too much. But it's one of those curiosities that there are still people there who care enough about tradition that they still make this wine.
Well, interesting. So many pockets of small artisanal wines, and yet you have the big, huge cooperatives. Now, I love this quote. We quote Richard Ford's 1840s observation that Valencians may not have carpets, votes, trial by jury, beef, and beer, but they do have wine, grapes, melons, ices, songs, and dances. How does that philosophy still define Spanish wine culture today? And maybe we can focus on Valencia, where I guess they're famous for their oranges, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I first went there, I'm embarrassed to say I did just think it was oranges, because at the great time in season, what you get in England is Valencian oranges. And they're like, wow. So all I knew was that Valencia had oranges. Well, actually, maybe I knew it also had rice. But given the fact it was on the Mediterranean coast, sort of between Barcelona and then, well, Alicante, for instance, it was clearly something special. What I didn't realize was that, in fact, they had this great culture of a number of local varieties, which, as somebody, a geek like me, it's so exciting to go and meet people who are working with these local varieties. And they have them because their father had them and their grandfather had them. Very often it's come through the family. What's interesting about them is not just that they happen to be different varieties, but that they make, I've often found, lighter wines. So we were just talking about Monastrell being a quite corpulent, weighty red, but actually you can get a variety, well, like Arcos, for instance, I can think in Valencia, which is a delicate, well, you might also almost say wimpy, but I like to say delicate red, which is kind of pale in colour, very pure and refreshing, especially if you think in Valencian climate. So what I love, there is this writer you quoted, Richard Ford, who went all the way around Spain and had very British views about Spaniards, and they're hilarious. And fortunately, I think Britons have changed as well as Spaniards have changed, but certainly Valencia, which is, in fact, it is the home of paella, of rice. So if you want to learn how to make a proper broad dish of rice with seafood or with rabbit or with whatever, talk to Valencia, and they're quite purist about what they put in there. No chorizo or the different kinds of English vegetables in their paella. You soon learn. But so it's the classic place for rice, but it does also have these lovely, lovely wines. But one thing that fascinated me was, if you go down the coast to one far end of Valencia, there's an area of what were big estate houses, very, I think, for grandees to come from outside the city. I have a friend who purchased one of these, and his business was actually furniture. Bought this lovely estate, and he populated it with lovely dogs and animals and chickens and whatever. What he didn't realise when he purchased it, I mean, it's a big estate and vineyards, is that he had an underground cellar which was filled with 40 amphoras, these clay jars which were buried up to their necks. Some of them were up to, I think the metric measurement is 2,000 or 3,000 litres. They're huge. And so this estate was obviously really a factory for making wines for the locals. And so gradually what he's done is he's recuperated them. Despite the fact they're buried up to their necks, he's managed to clean them out and makes wines in them. So we do talk about how it's Georgia, which is the place close to Russia, which makes wines and amphoras. But actually, there's a whole culture. This is Xarel del Rures. This has a really terrific selection of these amphora wines. And in fact, now I think about it, this wine that I'm drinking now, the orange wine, is called Amphora Brisat. It's made in amphoras also.
But just to be clear, it's not made from Valencia oranges or any oranges at all. It's still made from grapes.
Yeah, exactly. That's very important. Yes.
Well, let's go to sherry, because it's the one that I'm just fascinated with. And of course, from the time I read Edgar Allan Poe, The Cask of the Amontillado, yes. Whatever. But maybe just at a high level, again, just to summarize for those who are not familiar, and then there's, because we have all ranges of folks who listen to this, but the styles of sherry go from quite dry to quite sweet, kind of like German Riesling. But does it start from fino all the way to cream? What is that?
So basically, at the moment, you only really have 3 grape varieties, and 90% of them is one grape variety called
Palomino, yeah.
Which in fact is grown in other parts of Spain and in the Canary Islands. And out of Palomino, amazingly, you can make very dry wines, either a manzanilla or a fino. And then you mentioned the lovely, my favourite, Amontillado, which the point about the manzanilla and fino is they're a bit like let me talk about cutting a banana in half or an apple. When you cut them in half and leave them to the air, they oxidize, a bit like my orange wine. So the air gets in touch with them and they go slightly brown. We have the Fino and the Manzanilla, which don't. And then we have the Amontillado, which spends some time being a kind of white wine and then gradually is exposed to the air and begins to get slightly oxidized and has a wonderful, wonderful character.
Like a nutty taste, like
yes,
something like that, yeah.
And I was almost going to say it smelled, but it's not a great. It smells like furniture polish of the very best kind.
In a good way, yes, a good furniture polish.
If you were going to go into a lovely, well, I was talking about earlier the table from the Titanic, or that should have gone to the Titanic. A beautifully polished table from the Titanic would have smelled like that. And then you go into further categories: Palo Cortado, Oloroso. All of those are dry or mostly dry. Some of them I can think would be lovely with cheese, others with meat, or just being sipped with some salted almonds. Then what you have is you also have the sweeter ones, which the sweeter ones give me pause slightly because some of them are not very well made at all. They're cheap and cheerful, sweeter wines. And then there are some really wonderful ones which are made with very old wine to which some sweetener is added, and they're great. So we have that grape variety, and then we have Pedro Jimenez, which is the one which is typically, if you come across it, it's a real bestseller. If you come across it in sherry country, then it makes a very dark, sweet wine and is much loved by people who really like those sweet wines. So it's very nice if you drown raisins in it and then pour that over ice cream, that kind of thing.
It's like treacly,
it's treacly, exactly. When I associate it with all the flavours that we have, for Christmas, and Christmas pudding and mince pies and all those. And then we have a variety which isn't often talked about, but I think it's worth looking out for, called Moscatel. And Moscatel is the one grape variety that smells of grapes. And it produces a sweet wine, but one that's not too sweet. So if you ever see Moscatel around, it's always worth giving it a try. So that more or less is the sherry business. And they've tried over the years. I mean, I've just love sherry. So, it just happened that I do. It was something I was given as a student and I thought was great and I've stayed with it. And I've had the fortune to go, but it is something you had to learn to love. I think it's not a naturally lovable thing, though if you do love it. I've got a hanky here. I get these hankies in Japan. And one of the famous winemakers in Jerez, the city itself, is from González Baez, one of the very big companies. And his big thing is to say, I won't do it with this, but if you have a glass of sherry, what you do is you dip your gentleman's hanky into it, and it stays with you. The smell of the lovely, lovely, the smell of the cellar will stay with you and aromatize the room.
Wow, there's a trick.
They have tried over the years, the sherry people have tried everything to get us to drink sherry. I think they have learnt them now that what you need to do is to drink it out of a proper glass.
Which is what?
A bit smaller than this, but frankly a regular wine glass, which is maybe tulip-shaped, and just don't put that much in the bottom, but that way you can enjoy the smell.
Sure.
And then don't keep it forever. Well, in fact, the older ones you can keep forever, but don't do what my grandmother would do, which is have a bottle which she would keep for
once a year, every Christmas.
Yeah, just a little, dear.
Yes.
So, it has been used as a base for cocktails. It's what you might put into a Bloody Mary and that kind of thing. But you can't bring a whole industry, revive it with just cocktails. So what's been happening that's quite interesting now is that a younger generation have come in and they've seen what's happening. They're the children or the families there. And they have decided to make table wines, still wines, not fortified in any way at all, just a regular white wine from this Palomino grape.
Okay.
It seems quite obvious, really. Now, I mean, one of the reasons, maybe I mentioned it before, but if you were going to ship a wine around the world and you wanted it from the moment it left the cellar, when you didn't have refrigeration or anything, you just put it in the barrel, you needed to fortify it. So you needed to add some spirit to it just to make it stable. So at that point, the Fino sherries were fortified up to 15 and a half, and then the darker, older sherries were taken up to 18 or 20%
alcohol, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And so they did have this weight of alcohol. And frankly, though, actually, what I would say, the culture down in that part of the world is if you're having a glass of sherry, you are having something to eat as well. That's where tapas come from, really. So whereas I think in the more of the English culture is that you have a glass of sherry and you drink, and you have another one and you just drink. You don't eat with it, which is where the damage comes. So what's been really interesting is that they've been making these white wines. Now, they're not all perfect. Some are absolutely lovely and some aren't. So I think if you're interested in that, you need to go and talk to a wine shop, or you need to read the wine writers, and you'll get some guidance about. But they are beginning to be a thing. And so the really great piece of news that's only happened in the last couple of weeks is that finally there's been a big argument about this. And so, should we recognise these wines, or are they just Johnny-come-latelys who are making something that's not properly sherry? So they're now going to have a denomination of their own, and they're going to be called something else.
Oh, these dry white wines. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're probably going to be called after the soil on which they're grown. If you go to sherry country, it's completely white. It's this chalky soil. It's very remarkable, which in Spain is called Albariza. So it's probable that they will be called Albariza wines. So we'll see. But if you want to look as if you're really cool and, fashionable, then you'll definitely be having these unfortified. They'll be about 11, 12% wines, particularly from Palomino, and they're the best ones. Are really delicious.
And how did that tradition start of drinking sherry at Cambridge and Oxford? Because I remember during my time at Oxford, it was like classic to hide the sherry behind the books and bring it out. It's like, what's going on? How does anyone get anything done here?
That's a fascinating question.
Like, why didn't I pick up port or something instead? I don't know. Yeah.
No, because I remember when I was a student, is you would write an essay, and then your supervisor would sit in an armchair, and you, one-to-one, would read out the essay. You would have between you would have a glass of sherry. Now, I think of it now because I was 18, and it now seems like a slightly strange thing to do. But, at the time it seemed perfectly natural. I think maybe, I'm not sure now that, well, I think it still happens, but yes, why not regular wine? Or why not a glass of port?
Something else. Yes.
Exactly.
I guess maybe that was the only way to make those young essays palatable to the dons.
I think you're right.
I can't take any more of this. More sherry, please.
You're right.
And what are copitas, sherry wine bars? What are the copitas?
I mean, it's interesting. I've got quite a lot of them downstairs, and I've now found that I just don't use them. So this isn't quite the example. But let's say...
it's a wine glass, yeah.
It's a wine glass, but it's a much narrower. It's slightly shorter, and you get a much smaller hole at the top. It is quite hard to get your nose in. However, when you're down in Jerez, you're at a fair there. I call it a fair. What it is historically it was a horse fair. You would come together for horse trading and so on. You also used to have little tents, casetas, when people would just walk around with a half bottle of sherry and these cups, and you could copitas. And you could have, if you were clever, even I could carry 6 of these glasses in my fingers, and you pour them through and so on. So they're very handy. But they actually, if you've got a beautifully made wine, it is nice to serve it in a more beautifully made glass. The thing that you don't want, which used to be a thing, I think in my parents' day, was that you used to have a glass which was specifically for sherry. This people would say proudly, and it's something that goes in the middle and then comes out at the top, and it was tiny, more like a thimble, and that was really hard to drink out of. And somehow or other, people thought they were doing you a favour by serving you your sherry out of that. That's absolutely not the case. But I'm really a person for the sort of democratisation of wine. And the important thing now is to say to people, you can have one wine glass. If it's more or less the right shape, it'll do you for champagne or Prosecco, or for sherry, or for red wine or white wine. Don't get too caught up in the whole business. I think the thing I'm more concerned about is temperature. You and I just discussed about rosé wine, and similarly, one of the pale-coloured dry sherries I like to drink cool, definitely. This orange one, I'm quite happy to drink at room temperature. It sounds awfully fussy to say that, but I think probably most people will feel the same with their tea or their coffee. There's a temperature that you like to drink.
Exactly. That's right. It's not fussy or snobby. It's how you get the maximum pleasure from the drink and the aromas and everything else. So for the sweeter sherries, would you tend to serve them at room temperature or warmer?
There is a case for serving them at room temperature, especially if I'm thinking if I was going to serve one of them over a very lengthy meal at Christmas time with blue cheese and all sorts of things, and I don't know, nuts and raisins on the table, then I would have them slightly warmer. But because they're sweet, I must say I like to start with them quite a bit cooler. So if I was being accurate, I'd say half an hour in the fridge. But what usually happens is I put them in the day before because I'm busy, and then they come out really cold, and then you have to let them warm up. But the sweeter they are, the little bit cooler they need to be. Definitely, I would say start them cooler because they can always warm up.
Well, I want to get to Canary Islands. This time is flying by, but so the Canaries, I think you mentioned that they're way down. Are they closer to Africa than mainland Spain?
Absolutely. So I was in Gran Canaria recently in a hotel, which was like, how can I say? Well, it thought it was in Africa with lots of sort of palm trees and all sorts of things. It was a resort, so people had gone there for the African experience. But actually, at the same time, it was a kind of Spanish hotel. It was a very unusual feeling. So you can imagine that being so close to Africa, these islands were absolutely strategic in controlling passage between Europe and going down to South Africa. So it was there's been quite a lot of fighting over who owned it from quite early on. But they are definitely Spanish. But they have various things like their bananas are wonderful, beyond wonderful. Their potatoes are really different. So there are some things that are quite different. But the other thing is, these are all volcanic islands. So we've all begun to get very excited about wines from volcanic soils. And certainly they have a freshness, partly also because they're islands in the middle of a wind-swept ocean. I mean, they're islands in the middle of the Atlantic, effectively, a bit like the Azores. So you certainly have a freshness you wouldn't normally get in other places.
Okay. And it's a series of islands, is it? Like, how many islands are there? An archipelago or something?
Yes, so exactly. And it's around 7 or 8. But the key ones, there are 4 or 5 absolutely key ones. And then what's interesting about these islands, particularly where they're placed, is that because of the trade winds, one side is very green and fertile, and the other side is absolutely dried out. And so Tenerife is the island that's probably the biggest and best known, and has something really fascinating. Anybody who's interested in, well, actually, I think anybody would find it fascinating. You normally have a vine. We've talked about vines being in bushes or being grown on trellises. They have vines which come out of the ground and then grow feet, yards up the hillside and then down the hillside. So there is one vine will have very, 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 very long branches, and then during the season you have to go through and with clips tie all the branches together, and they've grown just about a couple of feet off the ground. It's absolutely extraordinary to see. It's an amazing technique. But the one thing I should mention, I'm cheerfully. It's the one thing that's not up to date in my book, which only came out in June, but I cheerfully talked about the fact that being volcanic islands and the soil being as it was and the isolation, the Canary Islands never had this louse, this insect, Phylloxera, which laid waste to many parts of the world and which was only rescued by grafting vines onto American rootstocks, which were resistant. But there's an abandoned vineyard in Tenerife where Phylloxera has just been found. So now there's nervousness of the greatest kind, because if it once sets root, and of course because it's an abandoned vineyard, they can't just jump on the owner and say, now, clean it all up. So I think it's something they have to manage very quickly, but it certainly means that transporting vegetative material and plant material now between Tenerife and the mainland has been stopped, simply because they have to make sure that it's contained in the island. And I suppose a good thing it's an island, but it could be. I mean, what's happened with Tenerife, as with some of the other Canary Islands, but particularly Tenerife, is their wines have really become a thing. They've become smart and cool and fashionable. So the last thing they need now is some kind of threat from Phylloxera.
Absolutely. And is Malvasia one of the leading grapes? Or you described Malvasia volcanica. Volcanic Malvasia. What does that taste like from the Canary Islands?
Well, exactly. Now, in fact, the one book I would never like to write in my life is the one on exactly that variety. Well, on the genus, there's a family of Malvasias, and we have them in the Canary Islands. They are from Greece. Historically, they go back a very long way. Madeira, all sorts of places. They're part of wine culture from centuries back. So the Volcanica, which is only related to a few others, it's a family tree, it's very complicated, is not. I think I would expect that variety to be quite floral and to be quite grapey. And in fact, it's not. But what it produces is quite elegant wines, which are quite full-bodied and flavoursome. But one of the best producers is on the island of La Palma, where they've most recently had, that's where the volcanic eruption was recently. And I think we sat there watching with terror when you saw this great slide of lava, because you were thinking, she's going to lose the vineyard. She's been okay, Victoria, but she's not the thing you would wish on anyone.
No, my goodness. Well, I mean, it's a real, not hodgepodge, but a real mix of opportunity, excitement, as you said, and yet serious challenges for Spain. Are you optimistic about its future?
Yes, I am, simply because I think there's so many energetic people. I would say there are threats. I mentioned, obviously, lava. I've mentioned the fact that people, I was talking to somebody at the beginning of the week who said the Mediterranean is now too warm and our oceans are too warm. And so they've had terrible storms, and they feel they're going to have awful storms this winter. On the one hand, some people have said we've had drought for 3 years, and yet, as I say, I was in Morocco on Thursday. One grower there said 2025 is going to be a great year. So I think, well, the message is diversity. We're in the second most mountainous region in Europe. It has loads of opportunity, but people are going to have to plant in different places or grow in different ways to, as they are in all parts of the world, to adapt to our changing climate.
That's good. There's hope. So this is your second major book on Spain. Where would you go for a third one, or are you done? I don't think you're done. Are you done?
I'm never done. No, I think I'm almost certainly going. My next one is a book on sherry. So
yes,
it needs to be done. So you walked into that one, I think. It was sort of obvious that the next one, but I have soon enough had to be updating my first one on northern Spain. But I think it's going to be rotating through Spain. If I had time, which I don't yet have at the moment, I would definitely do something in Greece, because I think if Spain is an interesting established country, the up-and-coming one with all sorts of interesting stories to tell and fascinating winemakers and lovely wines, and not particularly loved, I think a lot of people don't really believe in Greek wine, then that would give me a reason for writing about Greece.
Oh, wow. That would be wonderful. Do you have your current book there close by, Sarah Jane?
Yeah, I do.
You can hold it up. And for those who are listening, we will put the cover and links to your book in the show notes. And the title?
I shall explain that too. The title is The Wines of Central and Southern Spain. Now, it's out of everything south of Madrid, but it has a subtitle because it explains everything else from Catalonia to Cadiz, because it does also include that Mediterranean and the islands.
Okay, beautiful book, though. And I don't know if you want to flip through it. Does it have photographs and things like that inside?
Yes, it has. Oh, I wonder if we can see. Yes, a lot of photographs of my own with winemakers of all kinds. Yes.
Oh, that's great. What a great book. And as I said, 2 of you will win 1 copy if you contact me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. Wonderful, Sarah Jane. This time has flown by. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I think we've done a fabulous tour of, and only part, we haven't covered Rioja, Ribera del Duero, Galicia, all of that.
I know, we focused, yes.
So yes, I would just say if you're going to buy a wine from the shops, next time you go, make it Spanish.
Spanish. Well, you are a great advocate. No wonder Isabella and the whole crew love you. So I will say goodbye for now, but I look forward to continuing this conversation, preferably over a glass of wine or 3, Sarah Jane. So cheers. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Sarah Jane. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, how is the Spanish sparkling wine Cava different from the Italian bubbly Prosecco? Prosecco bubbles are created and captured in the tank to make it a pleasantly fizzy drink, Sarah Jane explains, whereas Cava is made exactly like champagne. It's aged in the bottle with its yeast, and it begins to develop other aromas which have nothing to do with flowers and fruit. The youngest Cava can be released at 9 months, which is much younger than the youngest champagne. So she suggests if you want a young, fizzy, fruity wine, go for Prosecco. It's also a bit sweeter than Cava. However, there is a big movement in Spain to have Cavas released and aged after 10 to 12 years like champagne, and they're really being celebrated there. And as she says, they are exceptional. Number 2, what makes Xarel stand out from Spain's other traditional Cava grapes? Sarah Jane gives us a helpful primer on pronouncing this grape. It is spelt Xarel period Lo. So the X is sh, pronounced sh in Spain. And then where there's a double L, because it's from Catalonia on the East Coast, there's a full stop period punctuation mark between the two L's. Anyway, she says, just throw yourself into it and call it Xarel. For years, I've been saying Xarel. Anyway, traditionally, she explains that when they were making sparkling wine in Catalonia using the traditional champagne method, Xarel was one of the 3 grape varieties. But people since then have started to identify this white grape variety, which was traditionally only a component in blending, can actually stand alone and makes lovely, fresh, exciting white wines, not very high in alcohol. And as she also notes, in Cava, Xarel is the grape that will last. It has the capacity to age. And number 3, how did Alicante's Monastrell grape give rise to the rare Fondillón wine, and what makes it different from port or sherry? Alicante is one of the best regions for the Monastrell grape, Sarah Jane explains. Historically, they used to make wine out of this red grape that got so ripe they didn't need to fortify it because the grape had so much natural sweetness that turned into higher levels of alcohol. And then the wine was stable enough that you could ship it in barrel to India or Africa or around the world. That's why port and Madeira and sherry all became very popular early on, because they could be sent around or shipped around the world with no problem in terms of damage or oxidation. These wines made from Monastrell were called Fondillón, and there are very few of them left. What excites her is that these curiosities are still made today by people who care enough about the tradition. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation with Sarah Jane, links to her website and books, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my books online now, no matter where you live. If you missed episode 162, go back and take a listen. I chat about sherry, Rioja, Cava, and other Spanish wine gems with Lawrence Francis. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
Sherry is one of the most complex wines out there. Sauterne is always going to have this amazing length and intensity. But sherry in the right hands, you can almost just turn it up. There's so many different colors and different flavors to paint from it. I think they're on the right track in talking about how well it goes with food. Food is a wonderful way to hook people and to get them to want to know more about the wine.
It's a great way into wine itself, but also categories of wine that have maybe suffered from misconceptions, like sherry has often been pegged as the Oxford Dawn University professor wine behind the books, or granny's wine, or whatever. But it is complex. It's nutty. It's wonderful. It has this range of styles from sweet to dry. You won't want to miss next week when we chat with Jane Masters and Andy Neither, co-authors of the terrific new book, Rooted in Change, the stories behind sustainable wine. If you liked this episode or learned even one thing from it, please email or tell a friend about the podcast this week, someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about Spanish wines. It's easy to find the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. Just tell them to search for that title, or my name, Natalie McLean Wine, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip tip question, or if you'd like to win one of 4 copies of the books I have to give away. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemclean.com/class. And that is all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/359. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a zesty cava or a toe-warming sherry. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.